Okay, so next let's take a look at chapter 11, in which we talk about network operating systems, and we'll talk about Windows Server, specifically Windows Server 2016 in the lab. But in general, Windows Server has certain properties that are different from the workstations that we use, which normally use Windows 10. So we'll talk about things that we don't normally see um, on Windows 10, that is Active Directory and domains, things like that. So let's back up a little bit, take a look at what clients and servers are. If you have a computer, you might be asking, what should I install? A client operating system like Windows 10 or a server operating system like Windows Server 2016 or 2018 or 2019, whatever. The answer is that it depends on the role the computer will play in your network. So when you think of client operating systems, they usually come with user software. So it's software geared towards people using computers like web browsers, Microsoft Word, things like that, applications. And then helper software like DNS clients, DHCP clients, things like that, that you need to access resources on the network, file sharing clients, things like that. Server operating systems can actually include all of this client software, but can also have server components. Like, for example, web servers. If you wanted to set up a website, you want to use a web server that'll serve out those web pages. You will want to set up DNS and DHCP servers, services on servers, and also file sharing services on file sharing servers. So to serve out files to people on a network, to set up their DHCP settings, to make sure that you translate domain name system names, things like that. So the main purpose of a client operating system is to run applications that the user can use. A lot of these applications these days especially often require network resources. And so you have to be able to connect to a network. So desktop computers typically need network client software like DHCP clients, DNS clients, HTTP clients, which is usually a web browser, but that's not the only way that you can have HTTP clients. You might want to use file sharing so that you can share files in an organization between other people who work side by side with you. You might have to use an email client, although a lot of times you tend to use a program or a site that will serve out your email, like Office 365, something like that. But a lot of people still use email clients to access their email. And these things, all of these client software runs typically on desktop computers. So if you take a look at, for example, file sharing clients in Windows, there are common ways to access shared storage using the Universal Naming Convention, or UNC path, or mapping a drive. So those are two different ways. You can use the UNC path, or you can map a drive. So the UNC path example looks like this. You do a slash slash. That should be a backward slash, server name slash share name slash subfolder, and then some file.extension. You can have any number of levels of subfolders. Drive mapping uses the net command. So for example, you can use net, that's the net command here, and then part of the second word in the command would be use, and then you can have a drive letter like E or F or G, anything. Actually, you could use anything between A and Z followed by a colon, and then the complete path to the share name. So once again, this allows you to use a single letter later on, so you can say CD, or you can just type in the letter. If you typed in netuse G colon and then all of this, and then you can say G colon, and then you'll go to that network drive. So the net command, you can like with all the commands that we looked at previously, you can be entered at a command prompt, or a logon script or batch file that you can execute. Okay, so compare the use of a client operating system to that of a server operating system. A server operating system is optimized to run network services in the background to speed up responses to clients that are looking for some kind of resource. So in a typical network, server provides centralized user account management, computer management, centralized storage to serve out files, infrastructure services like domain name resolution and address assignment like DHCP would be one example. And then server and network fault tolerance to make sure that even when things do fail, you can fail over and pick up the slack where things failed. So let's take a quick look at centralized user account and computer management. So a server-based network has centralized management of network resources, including things like user authentication. This is a big deal because you don't want to have a separate password on every single machine in a network. One way that you can make things simple for users is to make it so that they have one username and password, and you store that in a centralized server, and then you can log into every machine in an organization. Even if you have thousands of desktop computers, you have one username and password, and you have to centralize to do that. It's very hard to set all 1,000, let's say, desktop machines to have the same username and password. It can be done, but it's very painstaking, very tedious. Much easier to change it in one place, change the credentials, username, password in one place, and then make it so that everybody uses the same thing or use the same thing on every computer. So that's just one example. In general, you can do a lot of things with account management. You can set up all kinds of security policies for accounts. So remember, authentication is just the process of identifying who has access to the operating system resources. And most of the time we use username and password, although you can use other things like fingerprint, things like that. Authorization is the process of granting or denying authenticated user access to resources. So for example, let's say some people can read and write certain files, but other people who are maybe just not exactly part of a group, they can only read but not write or modify files, things like that. So authentication is proving who you are. Authorization is what kinds of resources can you access, what kinds of access do you have, can you read, can you write, can you execute, things like that. Okay, so most operating systems will have some kind of account management for both authentication and authorization. And the server versions of Windows has a centralized account management, authentication, and authorization system called Active Directory. So Active Directory is what we are going to use, and this is used all around the world, and mainly in a Windows environment. If you have something like Mac OS, you have a similar kind of thing, but it's not Active Directory, although you can log into Mac OS computers using Active Directory, so that is possible. So when Active Directory is installed on a server, the server becomes what's called a domain controller, and the users and computers with accounts are referred to as domain members. So you have to set up these accounts, and then users and computers that they use become domain members. So you have to do this centrally, and then once you are members, then you're able to access your account from anywhere, typically anywhere in that domain. And usually it's a local area network or a group of local area networks. And so Active Directory can be actually used quite extensively. You don't have to be just physically in the same room. You can be spread around across the world and still be in the same Active Directory. Okay, you can also do things like security policies. Accounts in Active Directory are used to distribute and enforce policies called group policies for network use and security. You can do things like, and it's not just limited to this, but you can do things like control which icons appear on a user's desktop. You can have restrictions on passwords. For example, if you want strong passwords, you can apply those restrictions. So these are just examples. There are many things that you can control using these group policies or security policy management. You can also control which applications a user can run or which applications a group of users can run. There's many of these things that you can control. Okay, so a Windows domain is a collection of users and computers. And so you can organize this in many ways. You can take a domain and you can manage it with the server, and that server, that physical hardware, is called the domain controller. Active Directory, on the other hand, is actually just you can think of it as a database that allows you to track all the users and all the computers and the services that server, that domain controller, manages. Once again, domain controller is basically that server. Usually it's physical machine, and Active Directory is actually more the data. It's like more of a database. So every domain controller server has to have Active Directory installed on it. So it's a combination of data. So it's a combination of a database and all the software that goes along with managing all that data. And so you could say a database, an Active Directory is a database of objects. That's how it's referred to in Active Directory. And an object can be, so a computer can be an object, a user can also be an object. And then you have rules for using these objects and how these objects can access things and how you can set up passwords, things. All of those rules are part of the Active Directory system. So when you look at how Active Directory is managed, if you were to log into a Windows Server computer, or a computer running Windows Server, like Windows Server 2016, 2019, this is what you will see. You will see an Active Directory list of users and computers. So computers, like we mentioned before, you're going to have a list of computers in your domain. You're going to have a list of users in your domain, and then you can have a whole bunch of other things too. So for example, here you're seeing a list of users, and you can actually have a list of actual people and also roles. And that's really where Active Directory shines, is you can assign roles, assign policies to roles, and then assign roles to people. And so you transfer a whole bunch of permissions and capabilities to users just by using roles. It's a very easy, or very convenient and nice way to do things. You can also make a computer a domain member. You have to join a domain, so you have to log into that particular computer and say, I want to change something in a computer, and I want to make this from being a work group, a member of a work group, to being a member of a domain, and then give it the domain name, and then you join that. That computer has now joined that domain. Doesn't mean that the users have joined the domain yet. So the user that you use to log into this machine and make this computer be part of a domain probably should be a system administrator account or a power user, something like that. But then once the computer joins that domain, the users themselves are actually not part of the domain yet. You have to do that in an extra step. You can also set up a centralized storage, and there's a lot of good reasons to do that. So if you're sending large documents or large files between users and they're all looking at the same file, well, there's no reason to take up space on each user machine on a network with the same file. You can put that in a central location so that everyone accesses the same file and it's consistent. It has the same contents. You're not making 100 or 1,000 different versions on each person's computer. You're accessing the standard version on a file server. So a lot of good reasons for doing centralized storage. So we store data in network for sharing files, for doing things like email, for keeping track of user files, for applications, for databases that you share with other people in an organization, for things like backup. And so networks can tend to use very specialized devices for things like backups, for storage area network devices, which is basically a way to store things, and it's just connected through a storage area network to the actual servers. So this is more things that you would see in a data center, and tend not to see that in a local area network, but so every once in a while you do see storage area network storage devices on a small network. You can have that in a small LAN, and it actually there are benefits to doing that even in very small networks. So you can use network attached storage devices or storage area networks to connect to storage devices. You can also use cloud-based storage, where you have to have an internet access to a storage device, in way up in the cloud, which is just like really just saying a data center far, far away, and that you need the internet to access. Okay, so we'll stop there and we'll pick up with network management and administration next.